A day late on International Dog Day, but a big shout out to my crazy fun, full of energy fur buddies Apollo and Odin. Love these guys so much, even though they drive me crazy all the time, but they always keep a smile on.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_Beeble. Today we're going to be looking at the reigning NBA champions, the Toronto Raptors, for their season preview. A different Raptors squad to the one that won the title last year. Michael Bolton, he wants to hear about it.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. To talk about the NBA champion Toronto Raptors, I am joined by the host of the Locked On Raptors podcast, Sean Woodley is here. Sean, how weird does it still sound weird, I guess, to hear the NBA champion Toronto Raptors?
Yeah, it's super weird, man. I'm wearing like a Raptors championship T-shirt right now. It doesn't make any sense, but it's real, and it's been a pretty awesome summer as a result.
Yeah, I could imagine I can relate to the feeling. So I remember back 2016 when my Australian football team won the premiership for the first time in 62 years. And then when it happened, it was just weird. And just the whole off season, you're just hearing reigning champions. You go, that's so weird. I never thought it would happen. And much like that's part of the reason I guess I was pulling for the Raptors in the finals, is to just get people who had that or never tasted that sort of success to have that feeling, and it must be great for you guys. But of course, everything's really different now. Sean, this team, not only did they lose the fun guy Kawhi Leonard, he is off to LA. Danny Green has gone with him, so we've got a different makeup of this team for the Raptors for this coming season. The guy who I think we're going to have to look at to step into a larger role this season is the Jedi, OG Anunoby. Do you think that he steps straight into Kawhi Leonard's starting small forward position?
Yeah, probably steps into like the position, but I don't think he'll step into anywhere near the sort of usage or sort of role that Kawhi had. Obviously, he's not Kawhi. That's ridiculous. I know there are people in his first season who were like, "Oh, look at him! He's quiet and is tall and is good and plays the wing. Maybe he's Kawhi." He's not Kawhi. That's ridiculous, obviously. But I do think he can kind of assume his starting role he had the year before Kawhi got to town, where he was a rookie. He started, I think, 50-something games or maybe even 60-something games, something like that. And he was really, really good as like the fifth guy in the starting five who was there to hit corner threes, could switch on defense. He wasn't going to put up crazy numbers or anything, but he was a useful guy to have out there just as like a healthy part of a starting five, almost kind of in the same sort of idea as what Danny Green was for this year as the fifth guy in their starting lineup. Didn't really have the ball in his hands very much. He would have entire games where he'd take like 3 shots sometimes, but he was always a threat out there. And OG's not the same 3-point shooter Danny Green is by any means, but he's been pretty average over his first couple seasons when he wasn't really projected to be a shooter at all coming in. And last year for him too was a really tough one personally. His father passed away early in the season. He had the appendectomy right before the playoffs that kept him out of the entire postseason. Apparently there was like an infection and stuff like that. He lost like 20 pounds according to what I'm hearing. And
Sean, you're Canadian.
Kind of
you're Canadian, Sean. You got to do kilograms, not pounds.
Yeah. So okay, yes, we're imperial in like the way that American, like the shorthand stuff, like pounds and feet is pretty much the thing. We don't do miles. Miles is, but like I don't know, because I'm just so Americanized living in Toronto, like an hour from the border. I feel like I could not tell you what like 200 pounds is in kilos. It's a bad, it's probably a bad thing. And
you don't know the conversion
metric system used, but yeah.
Okay, it's about 90 kilos, 200 pounds.
Oh, so there we go. But like 200 sounds cooler. 6 feet sounds cooler than insert how many centimeters. You know what I mean? Like
183 centimeters. Yes, it sounds a lot better. Yeah. I agree. As for Anunoby, what do you look at in terms of minutes? We're thinking high 20s in minutes. Are we thinking low 30s? Where are we pushing there? Because what he can do is he can come in, as you said, hit the three. He can provide defensive numbers. Although the block numbers that he put up in college, which were really, really strong, never have come across the NBA in his first 2 seasons. So we're looking at a 27-minute-a-night guy, 32 minutes a night. Are we going to have challenges from Stanley Johnson to get those minutes? Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, perhaps, although he is almost exclusively a four. Like, what are we looking at for Anunoby? How committed is Toronto to getting him those minutes and developing him as that guy?
That's a good question. I kind of think we'll see at the start of the year he's going to start somewhere in like the low 20s, and they're going to just sort of see what they have from a bunch of guys at that spot. I think we'll see a lot of Norm Powell at the 3 next to the 2-point guard lineup with Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry. I think we'll see OG obviously as the starter, and I think we'll even see like Stanley Johnson or even Matt Thomas, who they signed from Europe. I think going to try to see what they have there on the wing, because when you lose, Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green, there's obviously quite the talent vacuum there, and I think they just want to see what's on hand to see what can fit in there. Terrance Davis is another guy as well. He's like 6'4", 6'5", but he was an undrafted free agent that they signed after Summer League or the middle of Summer League, and because they have like a couple who are sort of tweener 2 guards and a bunch of like 2 point guards who they want to play together a bunch, I think we'll probably see them sort of skew small quite a bit, and that might come at the expense of OG. And you would think that in theory would just push OG to the 4. He's played some 4. I think maybe future is at the 4 at some point down the road here, whether it's with the Raptors or some other team. But I do think the minutes crunch at the 4 is going to be pretty tight this year. I think we're going to see Pascal probably play north of 30 minutes at the 4. We'll see Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol play together sometimes just because they're on the same team, and why not try some stuff out? This is going to be a team that tries a lot of stuff out. This is going to be a theme that we'll probably come back to in this podcast. But I just think the minutes at the 4 are not really going to be there for OG the way they would have been, say, last year if he were healthy and sort of in the regular sort of run of things all season long and in the postseason. I think he would have played a lot of 4. Not the case, obviously, with him being out. And I just don't see the minutes being there for him this year. So I think he's going to be kind of limited and pretty much just a 3 duty. And I think he's probably going to come in around 22, 23, maybe tops like 25, 26, unless he really sort of pops, just because there's just a lot of competition for minutes at the 3. It's going to be very experimental early on, because what the hell does Nick Nurse have to lose? When you lose Kawhi, you've just won the title. Nothing really matters for the Raptors this season. It's all kind of gravy, so I don't think they're going to be married to anything. And I think they'll give OG some run, but I think there's a lot of competition there.
Let's move on to a guy that you did. Actually, I don't know. I think he's worth taking a look at as a last round pick just to see what happens with those minutes, but I wouldn't be highly committed to him for this season. I still do like him long term, but I think we're probably a year or 2 away. If he is going to realize that top 100 potential, it probably isn't going to be this year, but it is worth having a look at for him in those later rounds. Pascal Siakam, a guy who obviously out of nowhere,
21, right? He's still 21. Like, he's a baby. He's got some time to develop here.
Siakam last season was the 47th ranked player in fantasy. He played 32 minutes a night. He came from nowhere. He'd been outside the top 200. Now, when we did this podcast last year, Sean, I believe, and I'm pretty sure I'm correct here, that I said I reckon there's a big chance that Siakam plays more minutes than Serge Ibaka. I was right on that. I did not expect anything like what we saw from Siakam, who took his usage from 16 up to 20. He took his true shooting from 55 to 63, which is a phenomenal leap up. He went from 20 minutes to 32 minutes. And one thing that did happen is his defensive numbers, they did drop off a little bit, but his playmaking was pretty strong. But overall, it was just a ton more minutes for him and a lot higher efficiency and a lot higher usage. A free throw percentage increase from 62 to 79 is such a big leap. Now the pressure is on him to be the number 1 guy in Toronto with no Kawhi Leonard there. I think he'll play more than the 31.8 minutes he played last season. But the worry I have here with Siakam for this upcoming season is how does he cope with being that guy who's not the unknown player anymore, who's not the second focus or the third focus for opposing defenses. He is the number 1 guy. Will that impact that efficiency where he shot 55% from the field last year and 37 from 3? Will that drop him back down? I think it will. I still think he'll probably be a 20-point per game scorer, but not at the same level that he was last season.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think he had a 63 true shooting percentage last year, which is insane. And that was on you said 20% usage rate. I would expect that usage rate is going to perhaps even flirt with 30 this season. That's what Kawhi was near last year.
I've got him at 25,
That's
so 30 is pretty high.
Rosen was the year before. What was that, sorry?
I've got his usage projected out at about 25% at the moment for this upcoming season. So you're thinking 30 is a big jump forward, look, which is totally possible. But I think that would come with a pretty significant hit in efficiency.
I would agree with that. I think, we're not going to see it be 63 for true shooting again. I think the three-point shooting, will probably take an uptick this year. He really, he fell off in the playoffs, but he really had an uptick in last season. Just three-point shooting was ridiculous last year. I think it was like 45%. And so I think we'll just he's one of these guys who feels like he adds something every summer, kind of like DeMar DeRozan was before. For these Raptors teams, he would, continually come back every summer with something new. It was never a three-point shot for DeMar. Pascal's already way ahead of where DeMar was three-point wise, but I just kind of think Pascal is going to add tricks to his little bag of tools. I think it's going to lead to maybe a higher efficiency than we maybe give him credit for. It's not going to be 63. I would say if he's shooting like 58 true shooting or something like that, that's excellent, considering the usage he's probably going to have. But I think, look at what happened. Playoffs. He was guarded by 3 of the 5 best defenders in the world for the last 3 rounds, pretty much exclusively in Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and then Draymond Green. And by the time the finals came around, he was thriving once again. He had 26 points in Game 6 of the finals. He really does seem to sort of take what a defense is giving him and sort of absorb and learn from it, and then sort of come up with counters for it. So that's the kind of season I think he's going to have. Maybe it starts off a little rocky where the inefficiency is kind of creeping in, but I do think it's going to improve as the season goes along, because he always improves as the season goes along. And I would say, if you're trying to find like a comparison point, I think it's going to be somewhere between what Kawhi was and what DeMar's been for the Raptors throughout his career before he got traded, in terms of like efficiency and usage and all that stuff. I think we're going to see Pascal really sort of take on like the clear number one job in this offense. I think he's going to have better efficiency and better three-point shooting numbers than DeMar ever had. I think his playmaking is pretty comparable to what DeMar was in the past, and he's shown a real propensity for sort of big-to-big passing, dump-off, stuff like that. If the driving and kick can come as well, which, it seems to be on the table for him, want to rule anything out, the playmaking can be there as well. He's not going to be Kawhi. Obviously, no one is Kawhi, but I do think there's a real good chance that he's like an all-star type player this season. I think north of 20 points is pretty much a certainty, considering what he did down the back half of last season. I think he averaged like 19 a game over the last 40 or so games. And I think we'll see him really just sort of have free run of the offense. Once again, there's not a lot of pressure on the Raptors this season. They can afford some bumps in the with Pascal as their number one guy, because there's not really any pressure on them at all. And so I really think we're going to see him get up to 22, 23 a game and be, just like a big counting stats guy. He's going to be on the floor a lot. I think his defensive numbers will probably tick back up a little bit as well, because there'll be more responsibility. He's not being flanked by Kawhi and Danny Green. He has a little bit more agency over the defense now. I think it's going to be a really, really big season for Pascal Siakam.
I think there was some chatter about Siakam maybe being like a second-round fantasy guy this year. I don't think that's quite the spot. He's 39th on ESPN, 39th on Yahoo, 33rd on Fantrax. I think that's about right, that third-round range, top 40 type of guy. Maybe he can take that step up, but again, so many of these guys that take those big steps forward, they tend to get drafted right at the peak of their value the following year. And I don't really know if you're getting him at 33 or 36, and will he become a top 20 guy? There's a lot that needs to change there. But the point you made about the defensive numbers is interesting, because maybe that can come back if there isn't guys like Kawhi and Danny Green taking the larger sort of roles there. Let's talk about the guy, Raptors legend, of course, Kyle Lowry, who is back again, who has, over the past couple of seasons, taken a back seat offensively. First of all, to DeMar DeRozan. Second of all, to Kawhi Leonard. He'd been a 20-point-per-game guy, and then in 17-18 went down to 16 points, and last year down to 14 points, and really upped his assist numbers. Now, this season, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe he's going to have to up that usage back up again, back up into the low 20s. He was at 19% last season. That's going to have to come back up. The assist will still be there, but he's not going to be able to. I think this team can be successful if Kyle Lowry is only averaging 14 points this season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Kyle's going to have to uptick his usage a little bit here, uptick his propensity for launching threes off the dribble. That was the thing that sort of unlocked what Kyle Lowry is as a player. That's what turned him from just sort of like a journeyman backup point guard into a 5-time All-Star, is when he started to knock down threes off the bounce. And he has kind of gone away from that a little bit over the last couple of years as they've shifted away from being a super heavy high pick and roll team. He's had less opportunities to do that. I think probably we'll see a bit of a switch back to that this year, a lot of pick and with Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol, because that's going to be one of the easier ways for them to create space and create offense. And this team is really going to struggle, I think, with just sort of off the bounce creation. There's not a clear, obvious score. I think Pascal can probably do it, but like they're not going to be able to sort of slow things down, throw it to Kawhi, and just have him get buckets. I think Kyle Lowry is going to have to initiate a lot through the pick and roll. And if that's the case, then those opportunities will open up for sure, because Serge Ibaka is a shooting threat, and he's happy to shoot. Marc Gasol has turned into a pretty nice three-point shooter as well, and I think because of the attention those guys will draw, Kyle's not going to be seeing two bodies at the top of the pick and roll. He's going to have more room to shoot, and he has to take it. Like, there was a problem in the playoffs last year at the moments where the Raptors were closest to being eliminated. It was when Kyle and Marc Gasol were reticent to shoot, and that's going to have to change this year. I think it will change this year. I think we'll see Kyle get back to sort of the level he was at before the Raptors changed their offensive style, before the 2017-18 season. And I think he sort of take on a higher usage rate. Whether it's the same efficiency at his age, I'm not sure, but I do think we'll see him creep back up towards 17, 18 points a game.
I don't think he's going to get to that level, because back in that 16-17 season, he had a true shooting of 62% on a usage of 26% and played 37 minutes a night. So those days are long gone for Kyle Lowry, but I think he can go back. Now, last year, he was still the 24th ranked player in fantasy. For some reason, he is being really undervalued on sites. 40th on ESPN, 50th on Yahoo, 57th on Fantrax. I think that's ludicrous. I think he's a back-end third-round type of guy, maybe early fourth, and so there's still a lot of value in Lowry. And if he jumped up by 4 or 5 points per game this season versus where he was last year, I don't think there should be any surprise in that. In fact, that's what pretty much I'm expecting him to do. So I think there's some real value in Kyle Lowry. His efficiency was one of the worst of his career last year, so we'll have to see how that goes. And the three-point shooting dropped from 40% down to 35%, which again is a little bit of a concern, but that also means that there's pretty significant room for that to jump back up and improve. A guy that I'm expecting to take a really big leap forward this season, probably not the same level of a leap that Pascal Siakam did last season. Big Freddie Vanvleet is going to have to step into a larger role with Green and with Kawhi gone. I don't think that he's going to start, but I think he's going to play starters minutes off the bench, 30, 31 minutes a night, coming off the bench. Dual backcourt there alongside Lowry as well. We saw what he did in the NBA Finals. I think, to me, he's going to have a real big step forward and could be in the line for Sixth Man of the Year.
Yeah, I am less sort of in on Fred sort of having turned things around entirely. He was not especially good last year until the last 10 games of the season. He was okay. Like, he had his moments, but I thought his sort of juice off the bounce was a little bit diminished. He was dealing with back injuries all season long. It's kind of been a running theme with him. And, I just think he's kind of dependent on guys to get him shots. I don't think he's someone who can kind of create very much, and I think that's why he works really well with guys like Marc Gasol, and why he works well when he's playing with Kyle. I do agree. I think he's going to play a lot of minutes. I think he's going to play crunch time next to Kyle in a very small backcourt that will have all of the heart and all of the propensity for taking charges of the world. And I do think we'll see his numbers probably tick up, and maybe he does get in that six-man conversation. I just think maybe the recency bias with him is a little bit prevalent, just because he was so ungodly hot for the last series and a half of the playoffs. People kind of forget he made like 2 shots in the entirety of the Sixers series. He was kind of non-existent first round against Orlando and was kind of up and down all season long. What really helped him last year is when he did get hurt. I think he had a thumb injury in like February that kept for 4 or 6 weeks, and that seemed to help his back heal. So maybe his back is just totally fresh and he's ready to go, but that's always kind of a concern with me to pop up. And if that is, his dynamism is really sort of diminished, and I think we could see him lose some minutes. We mentioned how much there is in terms of just like depth on the wings, not exactly like star level depth or depth. There's enough guys, I think, who could potentially eat into Fred's minutes if he starts to struggle, that I'm a little bit hesitant to just like anoint him like the 4th guy on the team.
No, I'm ready to do that. So we'll revisit this in 12 months' time. I think that we'll see. You're the Raptors guy, but I'm ready for him to jump up and take a pretty big role, because this is not based on what he did in the finals. Because at the start of last year, I read an article over on Basketball Monster talking about potential undervalued dynasty guys, and 2 of the names that came out were Siakam and Vanvleet, who had some really interesting advanced numbers that in 2-3 years' time could perhaps be top 40, top 50 sort of guys. And I think when I wrote the article, this is Fred VanVleet. This is a weird name, but at least it's one to keep an eye on. And then we saw him come of age. He's heading into his peak. He's still only 25 years of age. A larger role beckons. I'm pretty big on VanVleet. He's ranked 177th on ESPN. That's ridiculous. He, to me, is a guy that you take significantly higher than that. Yahoo 92, Fantrax 110. about the right spot, I'd be more than happy there. And I don't think there's any real risk in grabbing him at that spot, because I think we do see he's going to play more minutes than he's played last year, where he played just 28 a game and was still the 140th best player, despite being a little bit of a down year for Vanvleet. Still shot 38% from three, though, and averaged 5 assists per game, and all that is very, very valuable from a fantasy point of view. The center position is an interesting one. We know Marc Gasol came across in a trade, and there is a risk of guys like Gasol, maybe Lowry, perhaps Serge Ibaka. You talked about experimentation with this team. There's a chance that 2 of these guys, 3 of these guys, 1 of these guys is not on the team at the end of the season because they do have expiring deals. Do you think, now when Gasol, okay, let's go back a bit. At the start of the season, Jonas Valanciunas and Serge Ibaka, they were sort of alternating the starting center spot. Gasol came over, there's a little bit of alternating, and then Ibaka got suspended, and Gasol never gave that spot back up as the superior option. Do you think that he, again, is going to be locked in as that every night-ish type starting center, Gasol, for this season? And are we looking at 24 minutes apiece, or is it a 27-21 split? How are you looking at those two in terms of distributing those center minutes? Because you've already mentioned Ibaka might play some 4, even though he barely played there at all last season.
Yeah, I think we'll probably see Gasol be the go-to starter. Maybe there'll be some matchups where Nick Nurse wants to change it up a little bit, but I just kind of think the things Serge Ibaka does well, Gasol does a little better anyway, so I don't really see the same sort of, very different looks you have when you had Valanciunas and Ibaka in that platoon. They're so different, they could fit into certain matchups very easily, and that's why they did it, and both were really successful in that because they were sort of playing in situations where they could succeed. I think Gasol's going to start. I think Gasol also going to have to take on a higher offensive burden. Obviously, with no Kawhi, there's just a lot of shots up for grabs. And I think with Gasol, we saw him just sort of slide into that 5th guy in the offense sort of role when he came to Toronto last year. He didn't want to ruffle any feathers. He just, slid in and was like, all right, I'm going to pass every time I get the ball. I'm never going to shoot. That has to change this year. He has to be willing to shoot. He has to be willing to up his usage a little bit. I think he attempted like 4 or 5 less shots per game than he did when he was with Memphis, when he came over to Toronto last year. That just can't stand because there's going to have to be some sort of offensive creation. I think his assist numbers are going to be pretty this season. They're always pretty good because he's Marc Gasol, but I do think with the lack of creation on the ball for the Raptors this year, I think we'll see a lot of sort of high elbows with Gasol, finding cutters, things like that. They're going to use him pretty creatively. He's kind of a perfect Nick Nurse player in that Nick Nurse is weird and likes to try stuff out, and Marc Gasol allows to do that and can kind of do the stuff that they really started to do with Valanciunas before he got traded, where it was like, oh, maybe he can kind of work away from the basket a little bit and pass and find little defense and become more of a playmaker. Gasol's going to do a ton of that. So I think it's going to be a pretty big uptick from what he was with the Raptors last year. Maybe he doesn't get quite to the levels he was at in terms of offensive output that he was with Memphis, where he was like the number 2 guy behind Conley, but I think it'll be somewhere in between there. You're not going to see him average like 10 points a game and sometimes take 1 shot a night. Like that's just not going to be able to be a thing on this year's Raptors team.
Last year, overall, if you look at his numbers, it can be a little bit confusing because you look at him as the 50th ranked fantasy guy playing 31 minutes a night and you go, oh, that's fair enough. And a lot of these rankings for this season, ESPN's got him at 53, Fantrax at 62, and Yahoo at 73. And you go, well, maybe there's value there. But in the games after the All-Star break or after the trade deadline when he joined the Raptors, he was the 93rd ranked player. He had a usage of 16%. And played 25 minutes a night, scoring 9 points. Now, I agree with you. He's going to play more than the 25 minutes. He's going to have that usage have to jump up decently significantly, but probably not to the 20 or 19.8% that he was over the course of the season, because a lot of that, majority of the season, was fueled by what he was doing in Memphis. So I think it is going to jump up, but I still think that if you're taking him at 53, it's a big loss. I would not want to be doing that. To me, he's a guy you look at in the 8th round, the 90s sort of a range of a draft. Maybe there's some upside there if something does happen to Ibaka or Serge gets traded and Gasol has to push to 30 minutes. But at this point, I don't really think you want him playing the full 30, 31 minutes a night at the age of 34, going to turn 35 during the season. So there is some concern there, but don't be fooled by those last season rank numbers and last season total numbers, because it is more important to look at what happened in the Raptors portion of the season and then just bump it up a little bit from there. I think that's sort of where we're sitting with Gasol for this year. Ibaka similarly we have to really pay attention to what happened at the early portion of the season when he was getting the bulk of those minutes over Valanciunas, and then how that all dropped off. And his rank is similarly too high, 69 on ESPN, 81 on Fantrax. I don't think that Serge Ibaka is going to be a top 100 player this year. He played 27 minutes a night, but 23 after Gasol arrived. Do you think that we're looking at over under that 23 minutes a night that he played last, or in that back half of the season?
I'd probably go with a slight over, just because I think he's going to play some four. Like, I think a lot of backup 4 minutes, unless Rondae Hollis-Jefferson really sort of takes that backup
that's the thing.
Job and runs with it. I think we'll see that Ibaka Gasol frontcourt that we saw a couple times in the playoffs last year a little bit more often. They didn't run into a lot of matchups where it was necessary in the regular season. I don't think, such a small sample of games. And I think over the course of the season, just with the desire to keep guys like Gasol and Lowry and all this stuff fresh, there will be nights where Ibaka is sort of counted on to take some of the offense, and maybe that's a bad thing, but he's certainly not afraid to shoot. And if there's something that this team needs, it's dudes who are willing to take shots, because there's just such, I keep coming back to it, but there's just such a gaping hole, just like a vacuum of shots that needs to be filled. And if you remember that the start of the season before Gasol came in, Ibaka was excellent as just like a dude who was 18-foot pick and pop. It was like a layup for a long stretch of the season. It kind of fell apart as he lost his starting job, and a lot of that was helped as well when Valanciunas got hurt, and he was a starter for like a month straight, 2 months straight. But yeah, I think I don't think Ibaka is going to have the same raw totals he had last year, but I think there'll be nights where he just maybe there's like a daily guy nights where he really pops off just because of the matchup or because Gasol's not playing or whatever it is. He's going to be counted on, I think, a lot for the Raptors to just sort of provide random outbursts of offense, because it's going to be slim pickings on offense for a lot of games this season.
It was his best efficiency season since the 2012-13 season, where he had a true shooting of 61. He was at 58 last season, as you mentioned, fueled by a ridiculous 59% on twos, and a lot of the mid-range twos as well. He didn't take threes, he didn't hit threes either. That was well down, 2.3 attempts and 29% down from a guy that was taking a ton of shots from three. Really changed his role playing as a center versus more of a power forward. But we do have to move on to talk about who's filling that other starter spot. We've got OG probably taking over from Kawhi, but Danny Green's gone. So I think that probably the favourite at this point is Norman Powell to jump into that spot. Maybe it's Vanvleet. I don't think that's what they're going to do. But I have heard whispers, Sean, maybe you can fill me in if you heard anything like this, that there is a chance that maybe Terrence Davis does get a look there, especially in the preseason, just to see what he can do.
Yeah, I think Terrence Davis has a shot to start some games this year for sure. I loved what I saw from him in Summer League. Everyone seems to be just gushing over the guy, and he seems like a perfect sort of Raptors pickup, out of nowhere. Oh, hey, here's this rotation player that they just picked up the scrap heap. That's kind of what they've done the last few years here. But they have a lot invested in Norm. He's got 3 years left at just about $10 million a year, slightly north of that. And they have to sort of see what they have here. His role has never been consistent in any of his years with the team. It's always been up and down.
It's been
always
so frustrating.
Been sort of dependent on. Was that sorry?
It's been so frustrating, especially when Casey was there. Yeah. It was all over the place. But this is his opportunity. You're right. Yeah,
it's been all over the place. But I think back with me, with thinking about Norm, I think to the times where he's been the most successful, and to me, it's when he is not asked to be sort of the go-to guy in a lineup. He's never been very good in bench units where he's like the second option, but he's always been pretty effective as a starter, a fourth or fifth guy who can attack a rotating defense on a swing to the corner, and he can make a play there. He got a little bit more refined in his moves around the rim. It used to just be that he would do a straight line drive, and if he didn't finish with a lefty layup, he was throwing it off the backboard, and it was horrible. But it's kind of gotten a little bit more refined and a bit more in terms of touch around the basket. It's a little bit softer, and he's started to become a more reliable drive and kick guy, and I think that fits perfectly into what his role would be hypothetically in a lineup with Kyle, OG, Pascal Siakam, and Marc Gasol. There's going to be a lot of ball movement there. There's going to be a lot of rotating sort of on their out of position defenses that I think Norm's going to be able to take advantage of. So I think if he starts in a position to succeed, and I think his numbers when he started are just so hilariously better than they are when he comes off the bench, just because he is in that sort of diminished, sort of more defined role. I think this season DeMarre Carroll was hurt a bunch, and Norm filled in for him. I was something like a 15 point or something, he averaged in like under 30 minutes a game. It was remarkable what he did. So I think Norm stands a chance of having a really effective season if he does start.
I think he's a guy to look at in those late rounds of the draft, similar to where you'd be looking at OG. I'd probably have Powell ahead of him just because he does have that scoring burst. ESPN's got him at 196, Yahoo at 183, so you can definitely grab him in one of the last 2 rounds. And I think that's about the right spot for Powell for this upcoming season, who does have that. It does fit well alongside Lowry in those starting games. We've seen it replacing Carroll, as you mentioned, and replacing DeRozan at times in the past as well, where he'd step in and put up some really big games in those roles. Stanley Johnson comes across. I'm out on Stanley Johnson. I just don't see it happening. He's never going to be a good shooter. He can handle the ball a little bit, which might be interesting for that second unit. He can play some defense, but I just don't really see him pushing into any sort of... I think he's a rotation guy every night, but I just don't see it from Stanley Johnson ever becoming a starter-level NBA player.
I don't think he is going to be in the rotation very long this season if he does start out in it. I think Terrance Davis, Norm Powell, OG, Rondé, all those guys are preferable to me. Even Matt Thomas, who's like an insanely good three-point shooter and maybe offers nothing else. I would rather that skill than Stanley Johnson offers, because it's not really... it's not necessary on this Raptors team. When they signed him, it seemed like a great idea. Hey, Kawhi's gone, find a low wing to see if you can develop him along. But when they signed Rondé and Davis and OG's coming back and they signed Matt Thomas, it just makes less sense to me to have Stanley Johnson on the team. I don't think he's going to finish the season in the rotation. I think he'll start the team in the rotation because he's got some experience or whatever. But I'm so out on Stanley Johnson, it's not even fun.
If Kyle McEwen is listening to this, he's going to hate this discussion on Stanley Johnson. But yeah, I'm just out. I'm just out on him. I just don't see it ever happening. It is his 4th season coming up now fifth season coming up now in the NBA. I just do not see it from him. You did touch on Matt Thomas, who is interesting. He shot about, 1,000,000% from 3 over in Europe, but as you mentioned, he just offers nothing else. But a guy that can shoot, what did he shoot? 48% from 3, something absolutely ridiculous from 3 over there. Is he going to, with all the limitations that he has on his game, is he going to be able to play, or is it going to be more of a, say, the way Troy Daniels has been used in the past? Hey, we need someone to come in and hit some threes. Hey, you do that for 20 minutes one night, but then other nights you're completely unplayable.
Yeah, I think that's what it'll be. The joke with Matt Thomas is there's a stat going around that he was 99% on wide open catch and shoot threes in Europe, which is insane, but apparently it's accurate. What? And so maybe they'll have him come in as like a decoy sometimes in late game situations. I think he'll get some run at certain points in the season. I think it'll be fluid who's getting those sort of 9th, 10th, 11th man minutes in the rotation. I think he'll have stretches where he's in there. I don't think he's going to have a lot of fantasy value, though, and I don't think he's going to really figure into the rotation full time.
He shot 48% last season in Europe overall from 3, so that's obviously a really strong number. We've touched on Rondé Hollis-Jefferson a little bit as well. He was really disappointing last season. I have more faith in him than, say, Stanley Johnson. I think we have to pencil him in at this point as the backup power forward, but how about my man Chris Boucher, who was the G League MVP? Can Boucher, I want him to, can Boucher jump ahead of Hollis-Jefferson and provide some of those numbers? And he, to me, is a guy that I really want to just pay attention to, Boucher, because if Gasol gets traded, if Ibaka gets dealt, what are the Raptors' thoughts on Boucher, who's been around the team for a couple of years now and has really dominated at the lower level?
I don't really see it with Boucher at the NBA level. He's ridiculous at the G League. He's like the perennial MVP down there, and it's crazy, but he just feels he's always going to be stuck in the purgatory between the G League and the NBA. He just doesn't have an NBA body, and he doesn't really seem to fit in when he's on the floor. He's a great garbage time guy to have. He'll come in and bomb threes with aplomb, and that's awesome, but I don't really see it from him. Maybe Ibaka or Gasol or both get traded. They'll just say, all right, Chris, go run with it, and he'll get some numbers just by being out there. But it pains me as a Canadian. It just pains me, but I don't really see it in Chris Boucher. I'm not particularly about the idea. I'm honestly more intrigued by the Raptors' second-round pick, DeJuan Hernandez, than I am by Boucher. He just seems like he has more of an NBA body, more NBA skills. Boucher is awesome. I hope the best. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't really see it at the NBA with him. As I hope he just has like the greatest G League career of all time, if that's the case.
Talking about being disappointed as a Canadian, how was that first World Cup game, Sean?
Oh, not awesome. We're about 11 hours away from Kem Birch getting eaten Valanciunas as well, so that'll be fun.
Yeah. Now, last play we'll touch on here is that player you just mentioned, Dewan Hernandez, who sat out last year due to some NCAA bullshit, I think is the technical term for it. I thought he looked pretty good in Summer League. What sort of a player is he? Is he a rim runner? Can he step out and shoot a little bit? Like, what sort of player are we looking at here? Obviously, it's a few years away, but we keep talking about Marc Gasol's 35 years of age. Ibaka's 30. They're on the last year of their contract. There's no other real young big there. So are the Raptors looking at him to potentially 2-3 years down the track, maybe be a starting center?
Maybe that's probably a little too early to say. I think we'll see him in the G League a lot this season. He'll probably do what Boucher did last year and spend most of his time down there. I think that's kind of what he's going to do. I do like what I've seen from him. He looks like he's got a lot of touch. He looks like he put the ball on the floor a little bit. Whether he's like a rim runner in the traditional sense, I'm not totally sure, but he does have nice touch, so maybe he can kind of have he's not going to like throw down dunks like Clint Capella or anything like that, but I think he can have some touch on the roll and maybe be able to pass out of that a little bit, which is a really valuable skill, maybe even more so than just cramming dunks, although it's cool. But I don't think we'll see anything from him this season. What he does in the G League will be telling. It'll be his time playing in a year, so I think there's still a lot of rust with what we saw in Summer League. Probably see some rust as well in the G League, but he's got to keep an eye on for sure. And again, I'm higher on him long term than I am on Boucher. Whether I think either of them, are more the backup center at their peak, I don't think so. But he's at least an interesting guy. He's got some skills that probably would have seen him go higher in the draft if he didn't have that NCAA bullshit happen to him, like you said.
Yeah, I think that's the key there. Is he went that late in the draft. You go, he's a 59th pick, but I think it's because just people didn't see him play last year. We saw Mitchell Robinson, Anthony Simons go late in the draft the year before just because they didn't play. And I think it's a similar issue here to Fernandez, who could have been around that Bruno Fernandez, Bruno Fernando, Daniel Gafford type second round center, Nick Claxton sort of a range, I think, if he had have played last season. Sean, that'll wrap it up for all of these players. I'll just quickly go through my value and bust play. I think the value there, Kyle Lowry at 50 on Yahoo is tremendous value, and my bust, as I mentioned already, Marc Gasol at number 53. I don't think you want to be doing that. Sean, tell everybody where they can find you on the old Twitter and the podcast.
Yeah, I am at Woodley Sean on Twitter. Locked on Raptors is on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all that stuff. I'll be talking in Canada this week, which is surely going to be depressing. And also, I wrote a book about the Raptors championship run, myself and Alex Wong. It's called Be the Champs. If you order it, you can order it at Amazon, Indigo, wherever you get your books, also in a lot of stores as well. So check that out if you're looking for a piece of Raptors title memorabilia. Absolutely.
Go and check out Sean's book over there at Amazon and wherever you get your book. Sean, thanks for jumping on and talking Raptors with me today on Locked On Fantasy Basketball.
Anytime, man.
That'll do it for today's show. Make sure you are subscribing. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and on YouTube. Give me a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and check out the new Patreon tier, the Good Bloke tier over on Patreon. It's a new tier created because we're going to be doing more content over there. Twice a month, mailbag questions, mailbag shows, only for those Patreon good blokes. And of course, during the regular season, 2 shows a week, live shows before tip, giving you information on injured players, guys that are coming in, streaming options, DFS action, right before games tips. So going to like a pre-game show for fantasy. You get exclusive access to that by becoming a good bloke over on Patreon, patreon.com/redrock_bball. Follow me on Twitter at the same handle, redrock_bball. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Norman Powell.